Well, I imagine this will almost certainly be your video that I regret in about let's say 10 to 12 hours. But the Baltimore Ravens have defeated the Pittsburgh Steelers by a final score of 28-14 to ultimately end the Pittsburgh Steelers' 2024-2025 NFL season. And you know, granted, this is a a somewhat you know removed reaction from ultimately what was the result of that football game. Um, and I think ultimately for the Pittsburgh Steelers, it was really a tale of two halves. Um, I think during that first half, it was absolutely abysmal. I think there's nothing from that first half apart from the fact that everybody should be fired. You go what I think it was 7 and out on that first drive. You had a bad drop from Muth. We barely ran the football. Just nothing really got going on the offensive side of the ball. I think we had 3 drives. 2 of those were 3 and outs. One was only one first down, and then we went 3 and out from there. And that was awful. The defense, couldn't stop a stiff wind. Gave up, 21 points. Nobody guarded Russell Wilson on some of those read options. And it ultimately it was the same old Steelers team that we've come to expect at this point. And I think that is the frustrating part, is that we've seen this Steelers football team time and time again and again. Sorry for the lighting. I am fairly hammered. So that'll happen. But I think there has to be a point where enough is enough. I think on offense there is a genuine question as to how many people come back from that starting lineup, because if we're being completely honest, nobody had a good day at the offense. We did not run the ball well. We went to the air game almost exclusively way too early. And it really didn't get going that well. Um, you know, Russell Wilson did have his moments. George Pickens did have his moments. But ultimately, it didn't get going. Like, we had that one touchdown pass to George Pickens, who, again, I feel like he's a guy who gets traded this offseason. I feel like George Pickens' stock value is too high to where it doesn't make sense to not trade him. Maybe it's, hey, you pull a second and a third for him, and I feel like that's enough. I feel like, especially since this franchise got a second for Chase Claypool, I feel like that's definitely possible. But in the offensive ball, I don't see Chase Claypool coming back after the day he had today. Granted, he wasn't given loads of opportunities, especially on the ground. And I'll get to Arthur Smith in a moment. But I don't see Najee Harris coming back. Not because I don't think he's a good football player. I absolutely think he is. And I think in a different team, he has a chance to be a Pro Bowler, maybe an All Pro, because we see these flashes here and there of the type of running back that Najee Harris can be. But with the current lineup that we have, we don't see it enough. And I think it's going to be a James Conner situation where there's just not enough from him to justify giving him $9-10 million a year, which I think he's gonna command. Maybe you'll get away with 7 or 8 for Najee Harris, but for a guy who's put up 1,000 yards in each of his first 4 seasons, I don't see him making less than $8 million a year with his contract next year. I guess next thing for the offense would be Russell Wilson. I do not want to see him as a Steeler next year. I do not think that the I think that this year we have seen the upside of Russell Wilson, which is the same upside of the Pittsburgh Steelers that we've seen year over year at this point. We've seen for the past 8 years since the Steelers have last won a playoff game, which is wild card exit. Because yes, it was a 2-score game, but for all intents and purposes, we were dominated in this game. If you tuned in at halftime, you may think that, hey, the Steelers had somewhat of a chance today, but they really did not. They were dominated the entirety of the first half. If you go into the half at a 21-0 deficit, in the playoffs, that should result in people getting fired. And I think, particularly on the offense, Russell Wilson should be one of the first cuts. The second cut on the offensive side of the ball should be Arthur Smith. I don't know what sort of game plan you came into the game with Arthur Smith, and I could be completely wrong. Maybe it was down to bad execution. But I think for this game plan alone, you should not return as the Steelers offensive coordinator next year. The play calling specifically in the first half, when a lot of that play calling is under the control of the offensive coordinator, was absolutely terrible. Just to kind of keep it within probably YouTube's terms of service, because they could use certainly much stronger words. But terrible, I feel, is the most accurate way to describe that. Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith both should be gone next year. If this Steelers team wants to actually advance and progress into being a potentially competitive football team. And I think that you cannot look at the second half of the Steelers football team and say, hey, they've won the second half 14-7. Like that's the sign that, hey, this team can be competitive. No, that cannot be enough. Looking at this Steelers team and saying, hey, we are competitive in playoff losses for the past 8 years, that cannot be good enough. And I think some of those questions have to go to the defense. And I think at the head of those defensive problems is your head coach, who is defensively minded in Mike Tomlin. You have to ask, after how many years of coaching and watching the same football team, is this enough? Is watching the same Mike Tomlin team year after year after year enough? And I'll probably put out an extra video just kind of going over game by game how the Steelers season has progressed. Probably won't go into too far into depth in some of the games, but just kind of give an idea of how the Steelers season has unfolded if you're not super familiar. But I think there has to be some serious questions for Mike Tomlin and Terrell Austin, and to how their positions come in with the future of this football team. Because in the first half, the entirety of the team, obviously I had a lot of critiques for the offense in the first, about 10 minutes of this video now. I had a lot of critiques of this offense, but the defense as well came out and was just kind of gutless. Granted, on the offensive side of the ball, this game was over as soon as we decided to not go from that fourth and about 1 inch. Granted, it was from our own 30, so if you don't get it, it's obviously you're giving the Ravens the ball back. and they have a chance to go up 14 from about your own 30, give or take. But that was when basically the Steelers, hey, they went into that Will Levis surrender cobra, went down on their knees, just said, hey, yeah, we give up. We're gonna put up a valiant fight. We're gonna make it look like a game, but that's about it. Yeah, I mean, Mike Tomlin and Terrell Austin need to have some serious questions posed to them about what their view for the future of this team and the future of this defense is, because we did not stop uh, Derrick Henry. We did not stop Lamar Jackson, which, and, fair respect to Baltimore, that is an insane combo. That is a combo that has a very good shot at beating Buffalo, beating Kansas City, and then probably beating Philadelphia or Detroit, depending on who comes out of the NFC. I believe it will be one of those two. I think Minnesota has a shot as well, but I think it'll probably be Philadelphia or Detroit on that side. But this team is not good enough, and a multitude of things have changed over the past 8 years. The one thing that has not changed is Mike Tomlin. And so I think as an organization, you have to ask, do you part ways with Mike Tomlin? And that is a very difficult question to answer, because I think if you part with Mike Tomlin, I think that you have 31 NFL teams that will try to get him on their coaching staff in some regard, because he is a great mind. He has led these Steelers teams to winning seasons every single year he has been here, including a year with Mason Rudolph, who is now the starting quarterback for the Titans, who are, all respect to the Titans, not very good, and Duck Hodges. So there's clearly some talent with Tomlin as a head coach, but is that enough? Needs to be the question. Another thing on the defensive side of the ball, I think the secondary was really questionable. And I think a lot of that comes down to the decision to start Cam Sutton over Beanie Bishop. I think if there's one thing you absolutely must do this offseason, it is you put Cam Sutton in some sort of jail cell, because he should not be on the football field for the Steelers next season. Put Beanie Bishop on there as the starter every single snap. I do not want to see Cam Sutton again. Get him off this football team. He is not good enough. Otherwise, I think the Steelers defense has the potential. I think Patrick Queen has potential as a leader of this defense. Obviously, you have Cam Hayward as a first-team All-Pro. You have T.J. Watt as a second-team All-Pro. You have other pieces in there. You have Peyton Wilson on the rise. You have Minka Fitzpatrick as a Pro Bowler. You have Deshaun Elliott and Dante Jackson, who are some great acquisitions in this offseason. But ultimately, it's a matter of what piece are we missing and what piece do we need to add for the future. Because ultimately, when you give up 28 points, that's probably about an average day, and especially against an offense that's as robust as Baltimore. If you come out of that and say, hey, we only gave out 21 points, that's probably a good day. But when you say, hey, we gave up 21 points in the first half, we gave up 2 touchdown drives of 85 yards or more in the first half, that resulted of more than 75% running plays, that is absolutely unacceptable. And that cannot continue. And that's something that has to be thought of for the future. And that ultimately brings us to, what Steelers team do we look at next year? Is it, in terms of head coach and coordinator positions, who do we keep? Is this a head coaching scenario where it's worth talking with some of those Detroit Lions assistant coaches, for example? Because if you're a Steelers fan at this point, you've watched the same team with the same flaws for almost a decade now. As we've essentially watched the same team since the last playoff win. And after how long it becomes enough becomes a question that you have to ask at some point. When does this team lose its identity as the Steelers? When does this team become not just, a successful team, but just a team that's, hey, you're just above 500? When does this team become the early 2010s Bills that is just, hey, we're the standard of mediocrity. We're never good enough to have a top 10 pick, but we're also never we're never bad enough to have a top 10 pick, but we're never good enough to actually win a playoff game and move forward. And that is a serious question that this franchise needs to ask itself as we move forward. Because results like this game, where not only myself, but multiple other parts of the fan base had completely lost hope, not even before halftime, but before the snap, after the past 4 games leading into this wildcard game against Baltimore in Baltimore. When does it become enough to institute a full-scale rebuild and full-scale organizational change? And I think that's a question going into the draft in Green Bay, which I might have a video on. We'll see about that, as well as into this offseason. But yeah, there are loads of questions going in. And as of right now, I fully feel like I need to pass out. So I'm going to set this to premiere short, probably tomorrow, this morning. So that way I can be available just kind of as this goes live. But yeah, Baltimore Ravens eliminate the Pittsburgh Steelers from playoffs by a final score of, I believe it was 28-14 on the backs of Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. Loads of questions for the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens as we once again watch the same pitfalls of the same Steelers team year after year. I may have another commentary or two depending on how games play out, depending on how my scheduling plays out. So definitely be sure to subscribe and tune in for those. But until next time, and potentially until March when the draft comes around, I will see you later. Have a good night, have a good one, and stay safe.